A relationship is like a dance. It takes two to tango. Want to have healthy and successful relationships filled with passion, fun, and harmony? Hi, and welcome to the Two to Tango Show with Linda Sutton, a podcast that explores how we can improve your relationships with God, yourself, your intimate partners, and the community. Tune in and learn actionable insights and tips you can use to improve your relationships. The battle of the sexes ends here. Join Linda Sutton today and take your relationships to a whole new level while having fun every step of the way.
Welcome to the Two to Tango Show Home Edition, where our role and our goal continues to be to help you to improve all of your relations. Hi, I am your host, always doing the most, Linda Sutton, and it is amazing to be able to be back in the saddle, be back sharing with you, and be back kind of just working on the things that I find the most important in this season and reflecting on and improving the value of the new currency. And the new currency truly in this economy is relationships. It has been definitely a trying season, and so I'm just going to get into today's topic. And today's topic is how fairy tales are real. Fairy tales are real and teach us how to fairy tale. Now, some people, one of the things that I have seen in my feeds is that people will be quick to say, in some way, shape, form, or fashion, that fairy tales are not real. And so therefore get over it, come back to reality. When you look at relationships and you think of this whole happily ever after idea and concept, it is fantastical, it's a fantasy, it's a fantasy world, it's an unrealistic way of looking at relationships. It is very unrealistic to pursue a happily ever after. And so somehow fairy tales are this false thing. And I'm here to dispel that myth. What if fairy tales actually are not unrealistic, but actually the most realistic representation and blueprint on how we can and should approach our relationships? What if that were true? And I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you with that today, because I'm here to say yes, fairy tales are real, and here is why. First of all, it's important for us to understand why fairy tales exist in the first place. And I mean, depending on the different cultures, a different culture, whether it's called a fairy tale or a parable or a story that has proverbs in it, in cultures all around the world, people and communities and parents use stories in order to communicate, to educate, and to celebrate. Particularly amongst our young, fairy tales are used to teach the young of a community or a family the different values, characteristics, and behavioral expectations of the young people, and even the adults. But definitely with young fairy tales, proverbs, campfire stories, whatever you would like to call them, they are used by culture in order to transmit to the young in a entertaining, but in an entertaining way, what the expectations of their behavior are, to teach them life lessons, to communicate that information to them, to educate them on different processes and ways of being and ways of showing up. And then also to keep it entertaining, so that through the experience of the story, the young person or the young people retain the moral of the story, or the proverb or the story, or the meaning of the story. So in culture, that is what tales are used for, whether they're around the campfire, whether they're fairy tales, whether they're folklores, whether they're proverbs. That is the role and the goal and the purpose of those stories. And so they do have a role, and they are very, very much real because they are designed with that purpose in mind. So once again, fairy tales are instructional in nature. They are used to teach us, to entertain us, and help us to understand what we are supposed to do and how we're supposed to conduct ourselves to learn lessons. Number 2, fairy tales by nature have a journey, are a journey, and represent a journey to the ideal of a harmonious, everlasting love. Okay, so specifically in those fairy tales that are called happily ever after fairy tales, they represent having a journey, meaning the journey from one place to another. Fairy tales within themselves are a journey, so they take us mentally on a journey, on a process where the character is going from beginning to end to the goal, which is the happily ever after. And they represent in a journey to an ideal. So when the character starts out and choose your fairy tale, they are not in the place of everlasting love. They are not in the place of the happily ever after. They are not in the place of the ideal or the representation of the idealistic relationship. At the start of the story, the person is not there, but it is an ideal that they see, an ideal that they desire, or an ideal that they are in pursuit of. And so by very nature, fairy tales are designed to show us that there is a journey that we will need to take from where we are to where we want to be in order to achieve harmonious, everlasting love. It is by nature showing us that there is a start to the journey, that we have a journey that we need to go on in order to arrive at the ultimate goal in the end, which is the happily ever after. Number 3, all fairy tales have an adversary to confront. And this is why I said at the outset that one of the main reasons that fairy tales are real is because they're probably the most realistic representation of what relationships go through and what people in relationships go through. Why? Because there are very few fairy tales that I know that I can pull off the top and here in America, specifically the ones that we think of that involve a princess and a prince and some sort of evil stepmother, or however you want to say it. But in all of them, the common elements that you see, one of the common elements is that there is some sort of adversary that the main character or the main characters in the story have to confront and overcome in order to arrive or come together, or to arrive at the coming together to live into the happily ever after. For anyone that has been in any real relationship, we understand that relationships can have their challenges. They can have issues that need to be confronted and need to be addressed, whether those are real or imagined, whether they're figurative or literal. There is some sort of adversary. So the adversary might not be in the form of a evil stepmother or a wicked witch, but the adversary that the main character might have to confront might be a job lost, might be an identity crisis, might be some sort of illness in the family, might be a change of career or industry, might be a pandemic, might be a natural disaster. So there could be any number of things. It doesn't have to be a dragon or a wicked witch to represent the type of adversity that it has to be confronted in relationships. But fairy tales inherent with them usually have an adversary to confront. And fairy tales, number 4, have an adversity to overcome. So there's usually something that challenges the main character, that the main character has to confront that they didn't have to confront before. And at that point where the main character, the protagonist, has to kind of face that adversary, there's usually some sort of adversity associated with that adversary that the main character has to overcome and get on the other side of in order to achieve the desired goal and end. So it's not a matter of just confronting the adversary, but whatever the adversity that adversary represents, the main character has to make the decision that the only way that I'm going to arrive at achieving the happily ever after, the goal, the princess, the prince, the palace, the gold pot at the end of the rainbow, whatever the fairy tale is, they realize that I'm going to have to either go through it, around it, over it, or eliminate it in order to get to the other side. And that's very, very important, because a lot of relationships are confronted with that thing, whatever that adversity or that adversary is. And many relationships fail because they do not successfully confront the adversary or confront and overcome the adversity successfully so they can get over to the other side. Or it could be not just one adversity, but a number of adversities, and their failure to successfully overcome, defeat, go through successfully that adversity is usually the breakdown of relationship. And so the fairy tales actually show us in a variety of ways the kind of characteristics that the protagonist must have, or the main character must have, that they didn't know that they had before. They had to draw upon, cultivate, or activate, or allow that thing within them that they didn't have to in the beginning to emerge, so that they can successfully defeat, overcome, or have triumph over the adversity or the adversary. Number 5, how the protagonist or the main character handles the adversary or the adversity determines the outcome of the story or the relationship. There's a couple of reasons why that is important. How they handle it, whether they take it on or they run away, whether they go and have courage in order to defeat it, or whether they allow themselves to be defeated. How they handle that moment determines what happens next, whether or not they achieve the goal of the everlasting love, whether or not the prince gets the princess, whether or not the peasant becomes the king, whether or not the princess or the situation is rescued. And sometimes being rescued has a bad rap, but whether or not the main character has an opportunity to demonstrate his or her ability to protect that which is important to him, or protect that which he has charge of, or protect and take care of, and have the courage to do something in order to achieve a goal or an outcome. Number 6, fairy tales force the protagonist to grow and to transform in a way that actually is essential to the success of the relationship and the everlasting love. So in many of these, for example, in many of these fairy tales, it's like a show of courage. And perhaps the main character did not have to demonstrate courage, strength, perseverance, a sense of resolve, a determination to succeed and triumph, a willingness to sacrifice, a willingness to become stronger or discover talents and skills and strengths that they didn't know they had before. So those sorts of skills actually become necessary to ensure the long-term success of a relationship, or of an outcome, or of everlasting love. Relationships over the lifetime of the relationship oftentimes will have to come against a number of trials and tribulations that are just inherent with the nature of life. And so a lot of times, as a single person, or as a person who is not in a relationship, or a person who is not in a leadership role, or a person who does not have responsibilities, there are certain skills that they don't have to have. There's a certain way that they don't have to show up. But in order to step into a role of leadership, to step into a role of a relationship or caretaker, to step into the role of having additional responsibilities in territory, there are certain skills and character traits that have to be activated and tried and brought to the forefront in order to demonstrate not only to that person, but to those around them, that they have the ability to take on the next step in their life, the next rung of leadership, the next role, the next set of responsibilities. And number 8, which I kind of said at the beginning, but I want to underscore, is that fairy tales provide us the ultimate relationship blueprint and pathway in which we can understand and can be entertained about how to go about having a successful relationship. Some fairy tales are cautionary tales to let you know what not to do, but many of them are kind of a pathway and a blueprint of the type of journey that you as an individual must go upon in order to develop the skills, the tools, the fortitude, the resolve, and the vision, and most importantly, the commitment that is required to have a happily ever after and everlasting love that fairy tales promise at the end. But I think that fairy tales are amazing in that they do give us the blueprint and show us that with a sense of commitment, the development of certain skills and character traits like courage, perseverance, fortitude, strength, strategy, vision, creativity, that if you bring all of these elements to bear and you confront the demons, you confront the adversary, you confront the things that are in the way or attempt to keep you from arriving at everlasting love. Once you're willing to confront and defeat those things, whether those things are literal, like a monster, or whether those things are like when in those fairy tales where the person is forced to look in the mirror at themselves in order to see themselves in a new way, or become a new person, or transform themselves in order to be ready for the kind of relationship that is everlasting love, or your happily ever after. So the next time someone tells you that fairy tales are not real, the next time that someone tells you that it's unrealistic to believe in a happily ever after, you will know, and you'll be able to smile to yourself and realize and know that actually fairy tales are very real, and fairy tales give us a map, a construct with which we can follow to understand what we should expect as we are in pursuit of a happily ever after, and what we might need to do or confront or deal with or overcome in order to arrive at that harmonious everlasting love that we call happily ever after. So princes and princesses, kings and queens, the ideal is in front of you, the journey is there, and I'll see you on the other side. This is Linda Sutton at the 22 Tango Show. Ciao.
We have just concluded another moving episode of the 2 to Tango Show with Linda Sutton. Did you enjoy the show? If so, head over to the2totangoshow.com and discover a whole array of resources to help you spice up your relationship in every way. That's tangoshow.com. We would also like to hear from you, so don't forget to leave a review or feedback. Join us again next week for another entertaining and fun episode. Until then,